Imagine waking up tomorrow and hearing this sentence everywhere. The United States is now over $34 trillion in debt. Not billion, not million, trillion. A number so large that it almost stops meaning anything. But here's the question. No one ever answers clearly. If the United States owes $34 trillion, who exactly is being paid? Who owns that debt? And more importantly, does owing that much money mean America is no longer really free? Most people assume debt works the same way it does in real life. If you owe money, someone else controls you. If you can't pay, you lose your house, your car, your future. So when people hear that the U.S. is drowning in debt, the natural fear is simple. Someone out there must own America. Before we go any further, let me be clear. This video is not about panic. It's not about predictions. And it's not about conspiracy theories. This channel, The Rational Historian, exists to slow things down, remove the noise, and explain how power actually works using history and logic. So stay with me, because by the end of this video, the picture will look very different from what you've been told. And if you appreciate calm, clear explanations like this, take a second right now to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Yes. It helps this content reach more people who are tired of fear and want understanding instead. All right, let's continue. To understand who owns America, we first need to understand what U.S. debt actually is. Because it's not one giant credit card bill sitting on a desk somewhere. It's not owed to a single country. And it's definitely not owed the way personal debt is owed. U.S. debt exists mainly in the form of treasury bonds. These are promises made by the U.S. government to pay back borrowed money with interest. They are considered one of the safest financial assets in the world. Not because America is perfect, but because it controls the system those bonds live inside. Here's the part that surprises most people. The largest owner of U.S. debt is not China. It's not foreign governments. It's Americans themselves. U.S. citizens, banks, pension funds, insurance companies, and investment funds own a massive portion of this debt. Your retirement account probably holds it. Your bank definitely does. So in a very real sense, Americans owe money to themselves. That already changes the story. But it doesn't end there. Another huge portion of U.S. debt is owned by the Federal Reserve. This is important and often misunderstood. The Federal Reserve is not a foreign power. It is a central bank created by Congress, designed to manage the money supply and stabilize the financial system. When the Federal Reserve buys government debt, it doesn't do it the way a household buys groceries. It creates money electronically and uses it to purchase treasury bonds. This means the government is, in effect, borrowing from an institution that exists to support the system itself. That doesn't mean there are no risks. But it does mean the idea of America being owned by an external master is far too simple. Now let's talk about foreign holders. Countries like Japan and China do own U.S. debt, but not because they are trying to control America. They do it because U.S. debt is stable, liquid, and trusted. In fact, holding U.S. debt often benefits America more than it benefits the holder. Those dollars stay locked inside the U.S. financial system. They reinforce the dollar's role as the world's reserve currency. They give the U.S. enormous leverage in global finance. So if America isn't owned by a single creditor, what does debt actually represent? This is where history helps. Debt has always been less about money and more about structure. Empires didn't fall because they borrowed. They fell because their systems stopped producing real value. Rome didn't collapse because it owed too much. It collapsed because its economy stopped supporting its military, its administration, and its population at the same time. Spain didn't decline because it had debt. It declined because it relied on silver instead of building productive industries. Debt becomes dangerous only when it grows faster than a society's ability to sustain it. And this brings us to the real question. Not who owns America, but how long can the structure that supports this debt remain stable? That question doesn't have a dramatic answer. It doesn't end in collapse overnight. It plays out slowly, quietly over decades. Rising debt changes incentives. It shifts power toward financial institutions. It encourages short-term solutions over long-term thinking. And it slowly reshapes how governments make decisions. But none of this means America is owned. It means America is operating inside a system where debt has become normal. In the next part, we're going to explore how this system was built, why debt became the foundation of modern power, and why countries that control the rules of money can survive levels of debt that would destroy anyone else. Now, more importantly, we'll look at what history tells us about how long systems like this last, and what actually causes them to change. Understanding the world as it is, not as headlines make it seem. When we talk about American debt today, we're really talking about a system that didn't appear by accident. It was built slowly, especially after one turning point that changed everything. That moment came in the 20th century, when the United States stopped tying its money directly to gold. For most of modern history, money was limited by something physical. Gold, silver, land. You could only issue as much money as you could back with something real. That limitation kept governments cautious, but it also kept economies rigid. After World War II, the U.S. found itself in a unique position. Europe was damaged. Asia was rebuilding. America held the world's gold and had the strongest industrial base on Earth. The dollar became the anchor of the global financial system. At first, dollars could still be exchanged for gold. But over time, that promise became a burden. The world needed more dollars to trade, invest, and grow. Gold couldn't keep up. In 1971, the U.S. made a quiet but historic decision. It closed the gold window. From that moment on, the dollar was no longer backed by gold. It was backed by trust. Many people misunderstand what happened next. They think this decision weakened America. In reality, it gave America something far more powerful than gold: control over the system itself. Once money became flexible, debt became a tool rather than a threat. The U.S. could issue bonds, fund growth, fight wars, build infrastructure, and respond to crises without waiting for physical limits. But flexibility always comes with trade-offs. Debt stopped being an emergency measure and became normal policy. Every recession was met with more borrowing. Every crisis justified more spending, because the dollar sat at the center of global trade. Demand for U.S. debt never disappeared. This created a feedback loop. The world needed dollars. To get dollars, it bought us debt. That demand made borrowing cheaper. Cheap borrowing encouraged more debt. Over time, the numbers grew. Trillions replaced billions. And slowly, the scale stopped shocking people. Asking who owns America misses the deeper reality. No single country holds enough leverage to take control, but the system itself shapes behavior. When debt becomes permanent, priorities change. Governments focus more on managing markets than serving voters. Financial stability becomes more important than long-term reform. Complex systems replace simple accountability. This isn't unique to the United States. Every dominant power in history eventually builds systems that favor stability over adaptability. The British Empire did it through trade and finance. Rome did it through taxation and bureaucracy. America does it through debt and currency dominance. The danger isn't collapse. The danger is stagnation. When systems grow too large, they resist change. When debt grows to normal, reform becomes politically painful. Not because leaders are evil, but because the system punishes disruption. History teaches us that change is inevitable, but collapse is not. To understand what really limits American power, we need to step away from money for a moment and talk about something more basic: trust. Every financial system, no matter how complex, runs on belief. Belief that contracts will be honored. Belief that laws will be enforced. Belief that tomorrow will look enough like today for plans to make sense. When people say the dollar is backed by nothing, they're half right. It's not backed by gold. But it is backed by institutions, enforcement, and the expectation that the system will continue to function. This is why the U.S. can carry levels of debt that would destroy smaller countries. It doesn't just borrow money, it sets the rules of the game that money plays in. History shows us something important. No system collapses because numbers get too big. Systems fail when belief starts to weaken. In Rome, trust faded when taxes rose, but services declined. In late imperial Spain, trust weakened when silver flowed in, but productivity didn't. In the British Empire, trust cracked when financial power outgrew industrial strength. The pattern is always the same. Debt isn't the cause. Debt is the signal. When debt grows faster than real value, the system becomes fragile. Not visibly, quietly. In modern America, that fragility doesn't show up as empty shelves or mass panic. It shows up in smaller ways. People feel like they're working harder but moving slower. They feel disconnected from decisions that affect their lives. They sense that the rules favor institutions over individuals. This is not ownership. This is imbalance. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The biggest risk to American stability does not come from China or foreign creditors or rival powers. It comes from internal strain, rising inequality, political polarization, shrinking middle class, a growing dependence on financial engineering instead of real productivity. These pressures don't break a country overnight, they stretch it. The U.S. still has enormous advantages: a large, innovative economy, strong universities, global cultural influence, and the world's most powerful financial infrastructure. But advantages don't cancel consequences, they only delay them. History teaches that dominant systems don't disappear, they transform. Power shifts from one group to another, from industry to finance, from labor to capital, from local decision-making to centralized systems. This is why asking who owns America isn't the most useful question. Ownership isn't the right word. Influence is. The more complex a system becomes, the harder it is for ordinary people to understand it. When people don't understand a system, they stop trusting it, they disengage, or they become angry. That emotional shift matters more than any debt figure. Because once trust erodes, even the strongest systems must change. So what does all of this actually mean for everyday Americans? Not for governments, not for markets, but for people living their lives. Raising families, working jobs, planning for the future. It means one important thing above all else. The U.S. debt is not a bill that will suddenly come due tomorrow. No one is going to knock on America's door and take the country away. History doesn't work like that. What debt really does is shape the environment people live inside. It changes incentives. It changes priorities. And slowly, it changes how risk and reward are distributed. When debt grows, governments become more sensitive to markets than to voters. Interest rates matter more than long-term planning. Short-term stability often wins over deep reform. For ordinary people, this shows up quietly, in higher living costs. The asset prices rising faster than wages. In the feeling that progress takes more effort than it used to. But here's the part most conversations leave out. People have always lived inside imperfect systems. There has never been a moment in history where the rules were fair, simple, and stable forever. What separates societies that endure from those that fracture is not debt. It's understanding. Those who understand the system adapt. They make better decisions. They don't panic at headlines. They don't confuse noise with reality. History shows this again and again. During inflation, people who understood value protected themselves. During financial shifts, those who understood cycles stayed flexible. During transitions of power, those who understood incentives survived the change. This is why asking who owns America isn't the most useful question. A better question is this: who understands how America actually works? Because power today doesn't come from owning land or armies alone, it comes from understanding systems. Money systems, debt systems, institutional systems. The goal isn't fear. The goal is clarity. America is not owned by a foreign creditor. It is constrained, shaped, and influenced by a system it helped build and still largely controls. That system can continue. It can adjust. And one day it will change. History tells us that change is inevitable, but collapse is not. And this is where you come in. If this video helped you see the issue differently, I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think debt is America's greatest strength, or its quietest weakness? Write your answer in the comments. I read them. And the best discussions often shape future videos. If you know someone who constantly worries that America's owned or finished, share this video with them. Not to argue, but to offer perspective. This channel, The Rational Historian, exists for one reason: to replace fear with understanding, noise with clarity, and panic with historical perspective. If you're not subscribed yet, consider joining us. Because history doesn't explain the past to impress us. It explains the present, so we can think more clearly about the future. Thanks for watching.